Hi, in this video I want to talk about good days, bad days, good moments, bad moments, how the good moments usually go away when the bad moments happen, how the good moments don't take as much precedence over the bad moments usually win. You have a good day, and the bad days still exist when you have a bad day. Obviously, the good days um, don't have as much meaning, because obviously when you're in a bad moment, in many ways, you can feel like a bad moment lasts forever, at least if you're delusional. You can be delusional and feel like that's the case, I suppose, but the bad moments usually last a lifetime or last forever, while the good moments are just a product of not being as in a bad state. The good moments don't really exist. It's an illusion more than anything. But the bad days exist usually regardless of any kind of circumstances. They exist regardless of how much of a good day you may be having or a good moment you may be having. Even within the same day, the bad moments usually take precedence, like I mentioned before, over the bad moments that you have or you're experiencing. So the bad moments, I mean, this isn't really a complicated idea. Um, Sort of like it's easy to forget but not forgive, all these ideas. It's easy to move on and have a good moment, but it's not easy to forget the fact that you had a bad moment and you can move on, but it's always going to be there. These kinds of cliches that you hear, these platitudes of life, moving on, moving forward, living life, not looking back in the past and looking at it in a negative light as much as you can, but it's always going to be there. It's always going to be a scar. It's gone away, but it's still left a scar on you or whatever it may be, to a certain extent. But obviously, like I've mentioned before, like many people have mentioned before, the only thing that there is scars to be had. It's just a matter of how much of it there is, and you appreciate the scratches when you just having the scratches when you're avoiding the scars, but it's still a scratch and it's still pain, and you're just excited that you're feeling less suffering as opposed to more suffering, and it's a matter of um, how much of a relative position you are compared to where you were before, and then that's how you find your appreciation because it comes from the amount of experience you've had in a certain state and the relative experience that you have in a new state compared to that old state. And that's why in many circumstances, something could be bad, then all of a sudden it gets good, and even if it's not that great, because the thing that you had was so bad, and now it's been so good, makes it seem all the much better, all the much more better, even though the thing that you're experiencing now is a toothache as opposed to having your arms and legs ripped off from your body, being pulled off of your body, and even though it's still painful, it's still something, but it's still a pain, and if unless you feel that pain of having your arms and legs ripped off all the time, that's significant pain, the toothache is not going to be as a shining light, or is not going to be as appreciated unless you have that severe pain. So no matter what you're doing or suffering, you're always going to be having to go through something more significant to appreciate what you're going through right now. And that's a game that we're all playing, regardless of the recognition of that process that we're going through constantly. It's just a matter of how much it is. It doesn't matter if you've gone through a lot of pain or significant suffering. It's just a matter of the game that we're playing, and the game that we're playing is a matter of getting rid of and experiencing less suffering as opposed to where we were before. And that's there's only more or less suffering, and that's the only thing that we're experiencing is more or less suffering. And the scratch that we got, even though painful, is appreciated, even though it's just a constant scratch or like nails on a chalkboard. It's just a constant scratch, and sometimes it gets deeper and deeper, and then sometimes it eases off and it's a little less strong. Just imagine having a toothpick rubbed against your skin. Sometimes it's nice and it kind of tickles. You can sort of fool yourself into believing that there's some meaning to it. Other times it's leaving a small mark and you appreciate it. It's like, oh, that's kind of a pain in the ass. And then all of a sudden you have a deep cut, and it keeps going deeper and slower, and you feel it more and more, and it's pain. And then all of a sudden, once it starts releasing a little bit and the tension comes off a little bit, all of a sudden it's not as painful. It's more of a release, even though it's not as good as it can be. It's better, relatively speaking, but you need to go through that negative experience to that extent to make it as appreciated as it is. Sort of like releasing, having, if you have to go pee, that's something that most people can relate with. You have to hold in for a long period of time, and all of a sudden you release, and all of a sudden that means that there's no longer that tension that you've been having for that long period of time that's on you. Even if you didn't get rid of all of the pee, I guess you can say, if you didn't leak your lizard, you didn't fully empty your package, that doesn't mean that releasing it a little bit would have done you some good. I guess if you have enough muscle control, yeah. You can find ways to, oh, I can only release half of it right now. And then you release half of it, but at least it's not as much tension as you were feeling before, because it's about the buildup, about the tension that you're feeling more than anything. Um, so yeah, I think the analogy with the toothpick or the nails on the chalkboard, how screeching, how deep, and how uh, annoying it can sound, irritating, or how the feeling of just a minor scratch can be so much more, can be feeling, you make you feel so much, not necessarily satisfaction, but relief, even though it's not as good as it could be, it's not as bad as it was, and you need to go through that bad experience for them to make that kind of less bad experience more appreciated. And that's exactly the point. It's just a matter of relative positioning or a relative matter of being and the state of being that you're in, as opposed to another state of being that you were in before. So sometimes it takes a more significant change for you to feel that significant feeling of relief. So in many cases, um, phone's going, so I guess we can ignore that. But it takes that negative experience for that that far less negative experience to have that much more meaning. So sometimes it doesn't take having the least amount of pain or relief to experience some kind of satisfaction or relief from some kind of great tension. It just takes a great tension, and that satisfaction is relieved every time there's the tension goes off, even a minor amount. But the more it is, the more it is, the more relief you feel when it takes a greater pain or a greater amount of suffering or tension for that greater relief to be experienced. So the more good you want to have, the relief that we call the good in life, the getting rid of pain, which is still a pain. It's not good, it's just getting rid of pain, but it's what we call good if we want to put into any kind of paradigm. Um, Good, bad, relief, tension. And that's the way you would probably have it worded. That's the way it would be considered. So yes, I think that's a good enough description of the idea. It's not a really complicated idea. Paradigms, good, bad. It takes more to have more relief and or a longer amount. It takes a larger quality slash quantity of a mixture of those things to experience a better overall state. But overall state is to maintain that state, a more level state, as opposed to feeling more satisfaction, because obviously desire and relief are things that we don't need, and that's obviously the basis of addiction that we're experiencing is based on those kinds of relief tensions, and even something like I've mentioned before, an orgasm is a relief tension, but obviously it's just a matter of being in the best state the longest, as opposed to sort of like not having any kind of sexual desire would be better than having a sexual desire constantly pushing and tensing you, but I guess you can almost categorize it as a desire that's almost needed, sort of like a desire to eat. Otherwise, there wouldn't be much here to do. It's one of those necessary desires that we have to make this kind of game worth continuing, but it's a pointless desire to have when it can be so easily fixed by either fixing the issue that we can fix using whatever means that we can find necessary. It's possible, it's malleable, or you can find a way to eliminate the problem at its roots, which would be the roots of the problem or life itself. And if you can fix the problem that way, why even plant the roots? Why allow the roots to keep growing when you could just fix the problem immediately and just pull the roots out and decide the problem is no longer worth considering or is no longer worth fighting, worth existing. It shouldn't exist to begin with, but it's a problem that we have to deal with because we're here, and once we're here, we have to deal with the problem. There's only due to be done. We have to do something for it to be done, and that's part of the process of fixing the issue that didn't need to happen to begin with. But since we're here, there's a problem to be fixed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. We wouldn't be here existing. So it's a problem that has to be dealt with. And the problem is significant. So regardless, um, I think that's really all I need to say on the subject. It's a pretty common subject when it comes to the idea of something like anti-natalism and meaning, matter, value, because the value only comes in experiencing negatives and releasing those negatives. So that's really all there is needed to be mentioned on that subject. So, and I've mentioned this before plenty of times, so this is not really much in the way of new material when it comes to understanding the life game and how it works, the maze game, the addiction game, the chasing game, avoiding the negatives, and then doing it based off of addiction, because our addictions are based on those negatives as well, relieving of tension. it'd be best just to experience no tension. And if we could do that living, we should do that living, but we rely on those tensions to live and make it worth living for, to continue on, and then we fall for those addictions. Most in a way of rationalizing and justifying our existence to begin with, and rationalizing what we've done as avoiding a negative as well. So it's a matter of just avoiding it, and the best way is just to pull it out from its roots and not make the same mistake before. And that's continuing, that was already made, but it's a matter of preventing harm, not letting harm, taking away harm that's already happened, because it's already happened. Even if you fix the issue, the harm already existed. And obviously there's different kinds of harm that can, psychological harm, whatever it may be, that can last beyond it, but it's a matter of the fact that the harm already existed. Not that the fact that oh, you forgot or you're dead, no, then it no longer exists. It still existed, regardless of that circumstance. Even if it was a thing that you could look back on, you could retrospectively look back on it and say, I wish I didn't go through that. It was harm that didn't need to happen, but it happened. There was the value that existed and was spewed out from this life game that we can only do so much to avoid. And regardless, if it caused some kind of issue, even if it's something that can or can't be seen as some kind of prolonging, lasting thing that lasts until now, like a scar left over, doesn't mean that the pain didn't happen psychologically, physically, whatever it may be. The functioning circular mechanism of psychology and physical being, pretty much the same thing, a force feedback mechanism. Um, doesn't mean it didn't happen, it still happened. The suffering was there and it happened regardless of its effects that it had in the future, and or if it's still leaving remnants left over. Whatever it may be, it was still happened, and it didn't need to happen. Or it's either that, or the problem's still there and you're still experiencing it, or it already happened and it still had value regardless. So I think that's really all I need to say. It still had its effects regardless. Um, so anyway, that's all I need to mention. So thank you, and until next time. If there's anything else I need to mention on this subject, there's always another opportunity and another video to be made.